So let's go ahead and add the rest of our layers that we're going to be working with here, which is ports and coast geog and Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. All right, we don't need to use all of these right at the moment, so let's uncheck Stellwagen, and we've got ports and we've got our trip data. Now we can see that the order of these layers is a little bit confusing, so we can just drag and drop. If you drag this coast geog and just drag it down here, that can put that at the bottom. And that's how this works in QGIS. Whatever you want to see on top has to be on top of this list of layers. I'm going to drop that Stellwagen National Marine Sanctuary down just to the bottom, just for the meantime. Next is let's adjust our symbology here, just so that we have something that's easier to work with, and so that you see how to do symbology. So let's make this coast geography. Let's just make that a little bit less of a bright color, just so that we know where the landmass is, but it doesn't need to stand out as much. So I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to click properties, and here let's go to the symbology tab, and here we have a choice. We're just using the single symbol, but we do need to just change the color a little bit. And so we click on this color tab, and in this color tab you can use these different menus here, different toggles to select something. I'm actually going to try to make this kind of a grayish color, so I'm going to drag this marker down here, click OK, and I'm going to click OK in this layers property dialog box, and that changes my coast geography to this gray color. And I want to make that a little bit lighter color still, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to go back into my color, and I'm going to drag this to make it a little bit lighter so that those points will stand out a little bit more. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's move on to part one of the project, which is to map summary data by port. We want to find out how fishing affects different port communities. All right, so the first thing we got to do is we have to extract just those ports that we need for our project. All right, and so for this to make a little more sense, I'm going to uncheck our trip data just so that we can see that the number of ports here in our shapefile is everything from the Canadian border down to actually to South Carolina, right? And we only need ports that are part of Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. So we have to go in and extract those ports that meet those conditions, that they have to be either Maine or Massachusetts or New Hampshire. So how do we know this? Well, if you select ports, right click on it, let's go in this menu to open up the attribute table, and we can see that each one of these points is represented here. There's a code for the port, so the attribute for port is actually a code. There's a couple other attributes here with code numbers, but then we have the port name and then the state abbreviation, or state underscore AB. So we've got the first one here in this case is Piccoaxon Creek in Maryland. Well, we only need the ports that are in 3 states here. So let's get to work doing that. So we're going to use a tool called Extract by Expression here for that. So we first have to open up the toolbox, which on your menu should be this icon that looks like a gear. So click on that, and then you can either do extract, and any tool that has to do with that is going to show up, or we can do the vector selection menu here. Double click on that, and you see a lot of ways. So in ArcMap or ArcGIS, this would sometimes be called select by attribute, for example, or select by location. And we can do that here. We can select by attribute and select by expression and select by location, but something extra that QGIS does is it goes ahead and it lets you select it and export it as a separate data layer at the same time. So it's kind of a one-stop or a one-step procedure instead of an ArcMap where you have to do it in 2 steps. So let's do extract by expression. If you have already highlighted ports, then ports is going to show up here. If you've highlighted a different layer in your layers window, you got to go in here and make sure that ports is selected. All right, so here we've got to write our expression, and this is where you have to use your SQL queries to get the answer. So in this case, we know that by looking at the attribute table, we know that there is a field called state_AB, which gives us our state abbreviation. So what you'll end up typing here is state_AB equals, and you got to put the single apostrophe here because we're dealing with a text or a string field. So ME, that's the abbreviation for Maine, put in another apostrophe, or state_AB equals MA within a single apostrophes, or state_AB equals NH. So this is that what you're doing here is saying that you're going to select and extract all of the points where the state abbreviation is one of these three things. So it can be either Maine or Massachusetts or New Hampshire. Another way you can do this is by clicking on the expression button there on the right side, and you can type it in here, and you get a little bit of color coding just to let you know that you've typed this in the right way. All right, you click OK. Now, when you go to set the output here, that goes under matching features. So the default option is to create a temporary layer, and that would just show up with a generic name, which you would then have to resave again all over again. We don't need to do that because we know that we want this layer. So what you should do is to click on the three dots here and click Save to File, and that's where you select your folder that you want to save it in, and then you're going to select the name that you want to name this layer. And so what you should put here is call it Ports Gulf of Maine. All right, and so you see what I've got here. And the reason why you have to click the 3 points and click the Save to File is that if you just typed in the name of the file name, you'd get an error message, and that's because you have to type in the entire file path here. So if you don't know the entire file path, that's where you just click the 3 points, the 3 dots, select Save to File, and then select the folder, and then type in the name that you want to name this thing. Non-matching, you can leave that. That's more of an advanced option. In this case, we don't care about any of those ports that don't match what we're doing here. So you click Run, and then click Closed, and then we have our ports in the Gulf of Maine, or we should call this ports that are in the states that border the Gulf of Maine. As soon as this is done, you can highlight that that main ports file that we had, and you can remove it. We no longer need it, so you can take that out of the window, out of the layers. All right, so now we're getting somewhere we can work with our ports in the Gulf of Maine. Let's move on. So let's highlight our NEC GC304. Maybe you turn it on just so that you can see it again, and you right-click it, or if you're on a Mac, you do a click with 2 fingers, or Mac, you do Command click. And then let's open up the attribute table and see what useful information we can get from this. So total quant is the total quantity of fish that was landed on each particular fishing trip. So each record here in the table is one fishing trip, and that table is going to tell us the total quantity of fish, the port that the boat originated from, the other things like the length of the boat, the number of crew members on board, and how long the trip took, how many days for the trip. So in this case, the trip took 1 day, and there was 1 crew member on board. We also want to get an idea of the total amount of fishing work that has happened. And so we need to calculate a new variable called fisherman days. This is a measure of, it's literally just the number of crew times the total trip days, and that is a variable that can show us how much work was done, and because it takes into account the number of people and how much time was spent on this trip. So to do this, we have to add a new field, and we've got to calculate it. So we can do this by opening up the field calculator. So from the attribute table, you see this icon here at the top of the window called Open Field Calculator. So click that, and what we're going to do is create a new field. And so you're going to create the field, and you're going to calculate what goes into that field in one step. So make sure that box is checked. If for some reason you create the field and then you make a mistake in the calculation and you have to go back in again to recalculate it, you could click instead update an existing field. But if you haven't done it yet, let's go ahead and click create a new field. Our output field name needs to be called something like this: fish_days. I'm going to add another little underscore after mine just because I've already done it, and I'm going to do it again. We can leave the output field type as an integer because all of the input numbers, the number of crew and the number of days, those all come in integer form. All right, so how do you do the field calculator expression? We have to put in the two field names here. So we need to multiply the trip length in days times the crew. So you might have to go back to your attribute table and look at those field names to see exactly how they're spelled, because you've got to type them in pretty much exactly how it's stated here. In this case, if you just start typing in trip, then you'll see that you get trip underscore days. And so the mouse doesn't really work. You have to use the arrow key and just highlight trip underscore days, click enter. All right, you're going to do the times to multiply, and then you're going to start typing in crew. All right, that's highlighted. You're going to click enter, hit enter there. Now what you don't want to do, don't put equals beforehand, because then you're going to get the message that the expression is invalid. So it already is assuming that this is supposed to be an equals here. So you just have to put trip days times crew, and you click OK. And then once this runs, then we see our new variable here for fisherman days. And if you left click on the column, that's going to let you sort ascending and descending. You usually have to click it twice for it to kick in, so you can sort it ascending. So you can sort this by the port, or sort this by the trips, the individual trips that had the most fisherman days on it. If you scroll over here, we can also look at total quant. You can left click on this, and you can find out the trips that had the largest quantity of fish. All right, you do want to make sure that you save your edits. That's always good. So there is a save button here in your attribute table. And if you did close your attribute table, you could reopen it and click that save and then close it again. All right, the next thing we've got to do is to figure out what is the total impact on each port of all the fishing activity, in terms of how much fish is brought into each port, and also how much work is done by crew members from each one of those ports. All right, and that data is not visible in our trip information as it stands right here, where all the points are at sea. What we want to do is to summarize all of that fishing data and bring it into our ports. All right, so to do that, we've got to summarize our data. So in ArcGIS, you do this by doing a technique called summarize, which you do by opening up the attribute tables. So if you've done that before in ArcGIS, it works a little bit differently in QGIS. And if you haven't done it in ArcMap, then this is how you do it here. So open up your toolbox again, and you go to vector analysis. And you're going to be using statistics by categories. So you could go through vector analysis, statistics by categories, or you could just type in statistics by categories in the search box here. So you open this up, and your input vector layer should be our trip data, which is NEC_GC3_04. And we want to select fisherman days, our fisherman days metric here as our statistic. Okay, and we want to summarize fisherman days by port. Basically, we want to end up with one table where we see each port and then how many total fisherman days belong to that port. So under here, under the next option with fields with categories, you click these three dots here, and it picks up the attributes. So you're going to select the box for P port. That's our port names. You're going to click OK, and then something crazy is going to happen. The window is going to disappear. All right, now what has happened is it's behind your QGIS software window. So all you have to do is to either move this out of the way, or you can do a combination of keyboard shortcuts to just bring that window back to the front. Okay, but Don't get scared when that happens. It freaked me out the first few times that it was going on until I figured out what happened. Is all that window is just hiding behind your main QGIS window, and you just have to move it back to the front. After that, we have to figure out how to save this. So you're going to click to where to save. So just like we've done before, you click the three dots, you click Save to File, and we're going to save this table as Port Impacts Fish Days or something similar. This is just so that you know that this table, you know what the table is. You click Run, and then you can click Close, and then it adds it to our layers. And if you right click on it and open up the attribute table, we see a table here with the name, with a listing of the ports, and this time you only see each port listed once, and we have a number of statistics like min, max, range, and then the one we're interested in right now is sum. That's just the total. So for the port of Hampton, the total fisherman days based on that entire data set was there were 762 fisherman days of people working out of this port, compared to the port of Harwich, where there was a total of 2 fisherman days. So we start to see some trends on how livelihoods have been impacted in terms of just how much work people do. All right, but we can't leave it like this because we're going to be doing this for a second variable, and we can't leave the word sum here because then it's going to get confusing. So we need to make a new field and use the field calculator just to create a new field just called total fish days. All right, so we're going to open up field calculator again. You're going to create a new field called total fish days, and our expression is all we're doing is just copying sum. So all you have to do is type in sum with nothing else, and all it's saying is this field, every value for total fish days equals the value that's in sum. You click OK, you run this, and then you scroll over to the end here, and we get our total fishing days. And if you do that, you can click to sort, and we can see which ports worked the most, how much in terms of the amount of work done, which one had the most and which one had the least. That's just by clicking on clicking on the name of the field. Click Save Edits for this table, and then close that, and we're going to use it again later. Now we're going to run through the same thing again so that we can get total quantity of fish caught. All right, so you're going to do statistics by categories. Run this again. Make sure you're choosing NEC GC304. That's all of our trip data. In this case, you're going to do total quantity, and then again by port. So P port is the name of that field. Your window is going to disappear, so you just bring that back to the front. Save our temporary, or save your file, and then once you've got it calculated, you open up the attribute table just for our total quantity table, and you see we've got the sum, but you got to do the same thing where you use your field calculator to create a new field called total quantity of fish, and it's just same thing, going to equal sum. Click Save Edits, close that table, and now we can start joining the two tables to our Port Gulf of Maine layer. All right, so to do this, we're going to highlight Ports Gulf of Maine, and we're going to open up our toolbox, and this time let's try searching. Let's try searching join. We're going to join attributes by field value in this case. So you see this is under the vector general, join attribute by field value. Open up this toolbox. Our input layer is our ports from Gulf of Maine. Our input layer 2 is going to be our, pick one of these tables. You've got to do this in 2 separate steps, so it can be fisherman days first. And we've got to pick our 2 join fields to base the join on. So our table field from Port Gulf of Maine, this is going to be port underscore name, and our table field from our port impacts table is P port. Scroll down, and we're here where you see the box that says create temporary layer. That's always the one where you put what you're going to save the new file as. So in this case, it's under joined layer. You click the three dots here, you click save to file, and you're going to name this something like ports with fishing data. In this case, I put ports impact fisherman hour, or should put a fisherman days only. This is this is really kind of an intermediate file. We don't need this. We just have to do this one step on it. So you click run, you click close, and we get a new layer here, a new point layer. Now we need to do a second join because you can only join 2 tables together at one time. You cannot join 3 layers together at the same time. So now we're going to right click on, or not right click, but we're going to highlight our fisherman hours or our fisherman days ports impact layer. We're going to do the same thing, join attributes by field value. In this case, and then we're going to run through the same sequence, except this time we're going to be joining our total quantity of fish. You got to make sure you're picking the right name here for port, because there's 3 names for port. There's port code, there's port name. Make sure that you're checking the right one. You might want to check the attribute table just to make sure this is working the right way. And then in this case, we're going to save this as something a little bit more professional, like port impacts. Click save, run, and close. And then we can start removing some of these layers that we don't need right now. All right, so we've got our port layers here. We still have a bit of a cluttered screen, so I'm just going to uncheck our trip data and then close my toolbox so that I can get a better view here. And we have our port impacts that are just symbolized just as the same symbol for each one. So we've got to do some symbology here. So let's highlight this. Let's right click. I'm going to do properties and go into the symbology. So here's how we change the symbols and the display for a layer in QGIS. So here at the top, make sure you're on the symbology tab under layer properties. Instead of single symbol, you're going to click this and select graduated. We want different size points here. So we're going to click graduated. Next, you've got to select the value. So let's display the total quantity of fish. So you're going to scroll down here until you find your total quantity of fish. If you don't see that here in the menu, if all you see is sum, then that means you didn't complete all of the steps in between. So make sure you go back and do those steps correctly. All right, once you've got total quantity of fish, our method is not to have graduated colors. We want to have graduated circles. So we're going to change that to size. All right, next you see nothing really happens, so we've got to do a couple more things here. So down here, I suggest clicking on histogram and click load values, because that's going to show you the histogram or the frequency table. Then you can go back to classes, and what we want to do here is to select natural breaks. So under mode, you see where it says quantile. Let's go to natural breaks, select that. The classify button here can be important in case you ever switch to a different mode. You might need to reclassify your data. So in that case, sometimes you have to do this classify button again. And that just depends on, sometimes it doesn't catch it and doesn't catch it automatically. In this case, we're going to do natural breaks. And for now, we're going to go back in here. I'm going to change something, but let's just click OK and see what happens by default. And we can see that the points have changed size, but they're not too easy to read. They're not too easy to see. So let's go back and change the symbology up a little bit. In this case, I'm going to change their size. I'm going to start at 2 millimeters, and I'm going to go up to 10 millimeters. And the color did not seem to have pretty good contrast, so let's change the color as well. So if you go up here and you play around with these symbol settings, make sure that they're all the same color. You might need to click this drop-down box here and change that. But eventually, you're going to get them all to be the same color. You might have to do that individually, but eventually you will get them all to be the same color. You click OK, and then we see how this works. Now that we've made our base size a little bit bigger, that our symbols are a little bit easier to read now. Now that I've done that, I'm actually going to open up my coast geography layer, and I'm going to make that gray just a little bit lighter. And I can do that by, if you play around with some of these sliders, that's how you change the colors around. All right, if I do that, then those oranges really stand out a little bit more. Okay, so we need to change our layer title here, though, because it's not just showing port impacts, this is showing the total quantity of fish. So I'm going to right-click on this layer. I'm going to rename it. I'm going to change this to port impacts total quantity of fish, just so that we are sure what's going on here. And then let's do the same thing, but for total fisherman days. So I'm going to re-click this, right-click on it, duplicate the layer. That creates a copy. And before I rename this, I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to change what we're displaying here. So open up your new layer that you just duplicated, go into the symbology tab under layer properties. We're going to change our value to total fish days. So scroll around until you find that. And in this case, we'll need to classify again. Otherwise, it's going to say use the same classification scheme from the other layer. So click classify. That's going to put all the numbers in the right place. We can actually go to the histogram and load values and see how the data might look a little bit different. And then we're going to click OK. And once you do that, then let's go in, right click. I'm going to change the name of this layer. And now it says total fisherman days. Okay, so now if you look at both of these, they're both orange though, so we should change the color of one of them so that we can, if we look at them both at the same time, we can tell the difference. So I'm going to go back into the symbology one more time. I'm going to change the color by clicking on this little down arrow here and going over here and changing this to this blue color. And that is going to change all of them to the same color. Click OK. And now we have a bit of a different way to compare and contrast our images.